Well, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Richard Pearce. Thanks for joining me today. And as you would have read in the email that I sent through to everyone, what we're talking about today is the highs and lows of web design. I think I'm in a good position to be able to bring you this information, as I had a web design career that stretched for 16 and a half years. It's important to remember that half. I've been in business for myself now for 20 years. The last few years I've been a full-time course creator, and I enjoy, very much like most teachers do, bringing you information. And I hope that today you'll get something out of this. Whether that's a step forward to you starting your own web design career or having a second go at it, or perhaps you might turn around and say, wow, now I've thought about this, this isn't really for you. Either way, that's great for me. I'm just really interested in helping you out as best as I can. The way today's webinar is going to work is I'm going to present you some information, and then I'll talk a little bit about a course that I've produced that will help you take that next step if indeed you feel that that's right for you. And then we'll take some questions at the end. Now, I'm not familiar with this platform, so I'm not quite sure where you're supposed to go, but I think that you've got a couple of buttons up at the top, and one of them might be labelled Q&A. If as I'm speaking or right now or at the end, something comes to mind that you'd like to ask me, please click that and type in your question, and then I'll do my best to be able to go through all of those later on. A couple of housekeeping things. My internet connection has been a little bit flaky over the last couple of days. If suddenly everything disappears, then I will do my best to get it back up and going, or I'll jump onto Twitter if you've got my Richard O. Pearce handle handy, and I'll tell you what's going on there. I've got some notes, so you'll have to forgive me if I keep looking down occasionally. Yes, enter your questions as you go along. There is a chat window. That's really not the place to ask questions. There should be a dedicated Q&A button that you're looking at. So hopefully everything's working well at your end, that the audio's okay, and that we're ready to go, because I'm now going to switch to my screen here. And with any luck, you should be seeing my slide. And I will just, bear with me one sec. That's what we want. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be talking about the highs and lows of web design. This is the sort of information that I would have found invaluable 20 odd years ago when I started, because back then there was almost no information available about how to build a website, let alone how to build a web design business. I had to learn the hard way, and if I can give you some shortcuts, fantastic. I've got 10 highs and lows altogether, and I'm going to alternate. I'll start off with a high and then go to a low. And if you happen to lose track of where I'm up to, I've got a thumbs up for highs and thumbs down in the top left corner of each slide, so you'll know where we're up to. So let's kick things off, shall we? I'm going to talk about what I found to be the best thing about starting my own web design business, and that is something that a lot of people I think would take for granted. Every project that you get involved in is a new experience. Let me try and help you understand why I felt that this was the best part of the experience. You know what it's like when you go into a new job. Usually you're pretty excited and you're keen to learn and you want to find out everything you can about the job and how you're going to be involved. And there is a time where it's a really terrific experience. Web design is a bit like that with every project, and there's not many jobs out there that are like this, where every new project that you take on replicates that experience that I just explained. Also, you get to experience the project from start to finish. Again, don't take this for granted. This is often not the case with other jobs or projects that you might be involved in. You meet with the client at the beginning, you get to talk to them, work out a solution, and then come up with that solution. And so that's a really terrifically satisfying part of the job, I find. You never get bored. And when I look back at my own career, I worked with retail stores, arts organisations, a couple of radio stations, some manufacturers, an inventor, a shopping centre, that was a good one, as well as some non-profit organisations. So I was never bored. I was always working on something new. And so coming into a new project was always the best part of the job, I found. Closely related to that is the fact that you get to see your work consumed. Think about this. Your creation, the website that you're building for your client, is online for the world to see. you get to be part of that experience as well, particularly if you keep in contact with your client, as you'll get some feedback. You'll find out what's working, what's maybe not working so well, and sharing those experiences, which from a job satisfaction point of view is a very exciting thing. And this was the #1 high for me as a web designer. I'm going to contrast that though with the #1 low. And it's a phenomenon called scope creep. And many of you will be already familiar with this term. If you're not, scope creep or project creep are those little constant changes that might come up throughout a project's life, usually after the project's been signed off on and when the design phase has already been started. And the reason this happens is because, well, there's a number of reasons. It could be bad planning, but it's also just human nature. Think for a moment if you were getting a house built. And it's not one of those off-the-plan type houses. It's an architect design house. You go to your architect, you ask him to design it, and he or she comes back with a design, and you agree to it, and the materials are purchased, and the construction starts, and you then turn around and say, you know what? Looks like we're going to have a bigger family. Instead of 3 bedrooms, we'd like to make it 4, which means that we'd like to put another story on top, and the pool out the back needs to be a little bit bigger, and so forth. Of course, that's completely impractical when it comes to a house, but for some reason, some people think that when it comes to a website, that it's a different story and that you can just make changes as you go. And of course, technically you can, but it's a pain in the neck. At worst, scope creep can kill your business. If you always agree to those changes after a project started, it's not the money so much, but the time that's going to kill the business. I can think of a number of examples. One in particular was when I was working with a health product manufacturer. They sold this thing into hospitals and doctor surgeries. And I've done a website with this client before, and it wasn't smooth, but it was okay. And he was one of my first clients, so I was okay to go along with lots of changes the first time around. But as my business matured and he then came to me and said, look, it's time to build a new website, it was a disaster. We agreed on the design, we agreed on how it was going to work, and we got into the project, and the client constantly kept changing his mind, and I eventually had to say, look, I can't keep making these changes. I was very generous, and this is actually a rare occasion where generosity is a bad attribute. You need to push back sometimes, and I eventually had to say, look, this is just taking far more time than I anticipated. He said, well, it's okay, I'll give you some more money. That's great, but it didn't really solve the problem. You see, in the meantime, I'd been anticipating that this job would take so many weeks, and so I've been putting off other jobs, which meant that I was inconveniencing other people, and that was a serious pain in the neck. So scope creep can really kill your business. For me, it was never hard to get work, you know. It was hard to get through the work. The key to this is to thrash as much as possible at the start and make sure that your planning is as good as possible, and also work hard at choosing the right clients. Okay, here's the next one to consider. And for a lot of people, this is the #1. And for me, it was at the start. It might be an obvious one. But when you become a freelance web designer, suddenly you're the boss. And for a lot of people, that's enough. No more working for the man. Well, you know, I better qualify this in a moment. But the bottom line is that you get to decide when and where to work. You can, of course, do this full-time, but lots of people choose to start part-time, and I did that for the first 2 years. You can also do web design as a casual thing. You can add it onto other services that you might already be providing. Choose which project you take on is another big thing about being the boss. But here's one that for a lot of people is going to be inspirational. And that is, if you're the type that find yourself in the retrenching cycle through no fault of your own, suddenly you're not going to have that problem anymore. You're the boss. What I mean by that is this happens particularly in the creative industry. You might get a job at an agency and you're the last person into a company that might be shrinking a bit, which means that you're the first person out the door. And you're forever getting into this cycle where you're getting a job but not sticking in it. Of course, going out on your own means that you don't have that issue anymore. So for me, when I started, this was the best part. It was just a huge relief not having to do the Monday to Friday grind. No more office politics, no more dress code, although to be fair, when you go to see a client, obviously you've got to dress appropriately. None of those boring water cooler conversations or, you know, insert whatever it is about your current job that you hate. For me, it was even something which is going to sound really petty, but I just got really sick of every second day. At one stage, I was working for a wholesaler, And every second day, we would have the social person come and rattle their tin asking for another couple of dollars for someone's birthday. It was just, that whole office environment just wasn't me. And if it's not you, then being your own boss as a web designer is fantastic. But although what I've just said is true, I do need to qualify it, because the reality is the client is your boss. And quite often they look like this. This is a problem for a couple of reasons. It's not a problem as such. It's just that you need to, I guess, put it in perspective and remember that, yes, it's your business and you get to make the decisions. However, you're working for someone still as a web designer, and that's not always ideal. It also means that you don't get those same entitlements that you might be used to at the moment, like paid holiday leave. What we call in Australia superannuation, which I think in the US that's your 401k, isn't it? Your retirement pay is often paid for by the employer. Sick leave. Here I've got to pay employees up to 10 days sick leave per year. Your package at the moment might include some sort of health cover, which we don't have here, but I know some countries do. So you just need to consider, when you're going in business for yourself, that you do need to charge a little bit more to cover yourself for things like that. But dealing with clients is not always easy. You do need to agree to do things sometimes that you don't like. You've got to deal with the client's staff, and that can be more difficult than being in an office environment. They might remind you of that. And so I guess all I can leave you with here is that once you go into self-employment, the price of greatness is responsibility. That's Winston Churchill said that. And so if you want to do this, you need to be the sort of person who's prepared to do that. Okay, now here's the big one for most people. The biggest reason that a lot of people go into business for themselves is, of course, the money. Money makes the world go round, they say, but for a lot of people, it's not the number one, and it's not the be-all and end-all. Of course, we need money, and there's some great things you can do with it when you've got a lot of it, including helping others if that's something that inspires you. For a lot of people, though, it's only part of the overall equation. Now, as a freelance web designer, you can make a ton of money. Most don't, but you can. The reason that most don't comes down to a number of problems. Undercharging is a big one. Choosing the wrong clients can be another one. As it happens, I'm starting to write about this in the blog. So we've just set up a basic version of the Site Skills website. I encourage you to go to siteskills.com/blog and have a look at the undercharging article I've recently written, and follow the blog, as I'll have a couple more similar articles to go up in the next week or two. If I were you right now, though, I'd be asking, realistically, what can you earn? Well, before I answer that, maybe I'll answer in a different way. Rather than giving you a direct answer, let's have a think about average yearly earnings in your country. I think this is a great place to start, because if you could earn as a web designer the same amount of money as you're earning now, if you can replace your current income, or at least earn the average, wouldn't you do it? Wouldn't you do it to have that freedom of being your own boss and doing something that you really enjoy? That, for me, was what I wanted to do, just to replace my income to begin with. Now, this is something that will, of course, vary dramatically from country to country. Here in Australia, I think we're paid pretty well. And our average yearly earnings, averages are just that, they're just an average, but our average yearly earning in Australia is about $60,000 a year now in Australia. So if you were here, you would be wanting to earn at least that. How do you do that as a web designer? Well, you can play the maths however you like, but the example I'm going to give you is 10 jobs a year at $6,000 a website. Now, if you're suddenly in shock, just bear with me a moment. I think, though, that really, if you're in business for yourself, you should be aiming to earn more than that. You should be aiming to get to that magic six-figure income amount, $100,000 a year, which means that you need to take on 10 jobs a year at $10,000. Right. Now, for those of you who've maybe given this a go before, or if you just can't picture that at the moment, let me spend a couple of minutes talking about that. Because a lot of people will say, Rich, there's just no way. There's no way you can charge $6,000 for a website. I've struggled to get $500 or even $100 for a website. Look, lots of web designers make this and more. I know a couple of people from various groups who won't get out of bed for $20,000 a job. I'm not kidding. And the reason for that is that there are plenty of businesses who are prepared to pay that. Where most people go wrong is that they're charging by the hour or they're charging by the project, where instead you need to shift your mindset to charging by the value. Now, value doesn't mean just being good value for what you're providing. It means charging the project based on the value that it's worth to the client. Now, this is really a separate conversation in itself and beyond the scopes of what I wanted to talk about today, but I'll just touch on it quickly. Uh, you need to be working out what a website is worth to a particular business and then charging them on that basis. If you can make 20, 30, $50,000 a year more for a business by having a good or an improved website, then you can charge accordingly. A business will happily pay $6, $10, $20,000 for your solution because it's an investment to them. It's not an expense. They will see a return on that investment. And although you might think that I'm just playing with words there a bit, this is a principle that's absolutely true. If you can charge and go into a client and say, right, how can I make you more money? Then you can start charging really good money for websites. At first, pretty difficult. You just need to dip your toe in the water, and that's why I'm saying it's beyond the scope of today's conversation, because this is really just to give you a bit of an idea of what's possible and then hopefully get a few of you started. Because your first website might be $500, but as quickly as possible, you need to be working up that ladder. The other thing that I think I should touch on now is recurring revenue, because really, to me, that's the gold in a web design business. Sure, you can go out and just build a site, build a site, build a site, and keep walking away at the end, or you can build a relationship with a client and continue to provide them services such as social media marketing, website maintenance. Yeah, even though you might be building a site in WordPress or Joomla, lots of clients just can't be bothered with that. They want to pay someone like you to just update their website. You can do an email marketing campaign for a client and happily charge $500 a month for ongoing recurring revenue. Again, you might be resisting at this point, thinking, how on earth would a business pay that sort of money? If that's the case, have a look around at what they're paying for other marketing at the moment. The website generally is just a marketing tool, and businesses pay hundreds, thousands of dollars a month to market themselves. Just look at the local paper. After this webinar today, go and grab your local paper if you have one, make contact with them and say, I'm thinking of starting a local business, because you are, and I'd like to know what your advertising rates are. And you'll find that just those tiny little classified ads in the local paper can cost hundreds of dollars each and every month. So $500 a month to do something which I feel is far more powerful is not a lot of money for the right sort of business to pay. Get 10 of those and you've got your $60,000 a year. All right, just before I finish on the topic of money, I'm going to talk about another low. I'm just going to have a water. Excuse me one sec. All right, sorry about that. Okay, because money can also be a real negative. And the reason for that is because of the cash flow. Let me explain. So you don't need a lot of money to start. I mean, any business costs something to get going, but with web design, you don't need much. You need a computer. You need internet access. And of course, you've got both of those, otherwise you wouldn't be here now. You might need some software. Although these days, a lot of the software is free of charge if you're using something like an open source content management system. So you've probably got much of that already. And even if you don't, anything that you buy from now on, talk to your accountant about this, but anything you buy should be a tax deduction. Now, the real challenge with money at the beginning is that cash flow is king. You might fall into what a lot of web developers find is the feast and famine cycle. You have a terrific month, but then 2 really lousy months. And so you need to allow for that. That, of course, is the benefit of having a real job in that you get a paycheck each month. Once you're self-employed, then you need to consider that challenge. Your biggest challenge is having enough to live on, and therefore it's, again, really fantastic if you're in a position to start part-time. Be disciplined, keep on top of your figures, and do some maths, pay your tax on time. That's something that can really trap people. And don't assume that it's always going to be the way it is now. If things are traveling well for the moment, fantastic, but give it a little bit of time before you get comfortable. Okay, the next high, which is closely related to the first one, but a little different, is that if you choose a job you love, you will never have to work a day in your life. I think Mark Twain is attributed to that quote. You know the surveys that sometimes employment agencies send around that you see in the paper from time to time that have asked people what's the most important part about your job? Quite often it's actually job satisfaction or recognition well before money. And so what's more important to you? As a web designer, I find that the challenges can be really, really satisfying. And the first thing is that you've got to overcome the thinking that you're a web designer. You're actually not. You're not a web designer. You're a problem solver. And this was one of the great things for me in going into a business for the first time, finding out a little bit about them. And you don't need to be an expert in the business. It's actually a good thing that you're not, so you can see things from an outside perspective. You're there to help a business make and or save money. So you're really a solutions provider, a problem solver. And I found that a really satisfying part of the job. It's very easy also as a web designer to take the skill that you have now for granted. If you've never built a website for profit, but you've got the skills to be able to build websites, you really do have a fantastic asset. People will pay you for stuff that right now you're taking for granted. I'll try and think of an example. There was a client once I had who manufactured DVDs. You know, those old silver spinning discs that no one uses anymore? And years ago this was, they came to me and they said, oh, right now we've just got an email address on our site asking for people to send in their requirements, and I get back to them with a quote. And I said something that I really took for granted. I said, well, you know what? We could build a really simple form asking for a name and address and how many discs they want and whether they need packaging and all the rest. And we came up with a form that had about 10 fields in it. And I remember him asking me, but Richard, that's programming and I really don't have the budget for that and that's going to be really expensive. I said, oh, no, we've got this extension and we can just build that really easily, and it'll even send you an email. You don't have to go to the website, and it will send the prospect an email, and it will send the prospect to a page that talks about how good you are after they fill the form in so that they're less likely to keep looking around. And he was amazed. He said, that's fantastic. That's exactly what I want. How much? And that also is a really satisfying part of the job because it goes beyond just being able to build a website and being able to use your brain to come up with appropriate solutions. So with web design, you can love your job and you can equally hate your job. All right, so let me qualify this. There is a danger that over time you can come to hate the work, and this can be for a number of reasons. The big one is if you're not making enough money, of course, but it can also be just working with clients because the customer is always right. Rubbish. The customer's hardly ever right. The thing is, though, that they're the ones paying the bills, and so you need to respect them. Clients will challenge you for all sorts of stupid reasons, and you just got to be able to deal with that. And this might sound obvious, but I've seen the wrong approach from clients, from other web designers so many times. You know, they will really challenge their clients on this. And you can't do that. You've got to be prepared to be humble and say, yeah, right then, if that's the way you want it, fine, we'll do that. In fact, you probably want to lift your tone up a little bit from the way I just did it. You need to be respectful. You need to see things. It's about empathy. You need to be able to see things from their point of view. So be prepared to accept revisions. And I guess the overall message here is it's not yours. Be prepared to let it go. There's a real danger in getting too close to a project. And I did this all the time. Actually, I remember having a coffee meeting with a client and they wanted some changes, and I was saying, well, you know, we're not happy about this and this should do that, and I want this moved over here. And my reaction was something like, oh, yeah, well, okay, I guess I can live with that. You know, I guess I can be, I'm happy enough about that, or something like that, meaning that it was down to me, not them. And they gave me this incredulous look, and I picked up on it luckily, and I said, sorry. You know, you've got to understand that as a web designer, I feel a sense of ownership over the project, and I want to make sure that I'm happy with it as well. Okay, so that's that point. Now, the next high is all to do with marketing. Unlike a lot of businesses, as a web designer, once you've got that momentum going, you don't need to do much, if any, marketing. Once you've done a few sites, the word should spread if you've looked after people well, and referrals will start coming to you. The phone literally rings, and all you've got to do is say, hello, yes, when can I come and see you? And those sorts of clients are the best because they're already sold. They know you through a third party who they trust, and so recurring work, referral work can come in quite easily. And at that point, you need to do little, if any, marketing. The challenge, of course, is getting to that point. And I like the rowing analogy, one, because I used to do it, but two, it works, it's quite apt for this example. It takes a lot of energy to get that boat going. Let me tell you, there's a lot of weight in it, in the boat itself and in your fellow rowers, and the oars are heavy as well. And once you've got the momentum going of the boat, though, it's much, much easier to keep it going. And it's hard, though, to get to that point. So you need to battle it first. But at that point, all you've got to do is just keep the oars going through the water. You can't stop. Obviously, it'll come to a stop. And you want to be doing a little bit of marketing because you don't want to miss out on better opportunities. But it's great once you get to that point. The downside, of course, is you have to get to that point. And so initially, the low is that you've got to be prepared to get uncomfortable. If you're not prepared to get out of your office, off your chair, and go and talk to people face to face, and you're going to struggle. That is part of the deal. You do need to go and talk to people. Sure, I know many web developers that just do everything by email and so forth, but usually when you're starting, you need to get out and about and talking to people. So yes, this is a skill, but you know what? Sales isn't that hard. Yes, it's a skill and there's some techniques to learn, but ultimately it's just about having a conversation and convincing the other person that they need what you're offering, and then asking them if you can help them. You know, it takes a long time sometimes for people to know you enough, like you enough, and trust you enough to part money and actually take you on board as their web designer. This is another reason why it's often a good idea to start small rather than throwing a lot into it. And if you can do that part-time, all the better. So I've gone through 5 highs and 5 lows, and I think that summarises what it's like to be a web designer quite well. If you would like to revise that, you'd find those slides helpful. Later on in my day, I'll upload them. They're not there just yet, but make a note of my SlideShare address at slideshare.net/rickshaw. Please note the spelling. That's my parent company name. And you might like to follow me there as well so that you'll get notified of any other slides that I put up there in the future. Okay, well, it's almost your turn, and so I'm going to ask you to enter some questions. We've got a couple there already. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And while you go ahead and do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my course, which is called Kickstart Your Web Design Business. This is the course that I would have loved 20 years ago to really get me off to a good start. If you found the information that I've presented today or your own research has got you to a point where you're thinking, you know what, I really wouldn't mind giving this a go, or I want to launch into it full time, whether you're doing something at the moment which isn't working out, whether you're semi-retired, whether you're sick of being retrenched, or whether maybe you're at a web design agency now and you're thinking about going out on your own or doing a bit on the side before you do that full time, then feel free to consider this course. I'm not going to spend an enormous amount of time talking about it now because it will apply to some of you and not others. Instead, I'd encourage you to go through to the Site Skills page and have a look at it, because I've prepared a 10-minute video there which talks all about it. The course is $150, but for today only, because this offer ends today, we do have a special offer. I'm going to offer this at 50% off. I can't see myself ever offering it cheaper than this. In fact, I'm not really a big fan of discounting courses, so today would be a great chance for you to get that if you want it for that reason, but also for another reason. I'm going to include some Q&A sessions for everybody who enrolls in this course by the end of today, where, much like what we're about to do, you'll be able to come along and ask some questions directly of me. I love online training. I've done a little bit of live training. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I love the online aspect because you're able to learn at your own pace, in your own home, revise videos if you like. But I appreciate that for some people, there's also benefit in going and doing a live class. And so by having these webinars, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You'll be able to learn a little bit in your own time, come along to one of these webinars and then ask some questions. This will help to ensure that you're never stuck and that you'll be able to move forward. I'm not going to be doing that as part of the course later. That's only part of this introductory offer. And once again, that's going to end today. So if that's of interest to you, please at the end of this, go to learn.siteskills.com. And you'll see that little thumbnail that is on the screen at the right at the moment. You can learn more about the course there. I go through everything that's included. There's 24 videos. There's some case studies. There's also some interviews, and I've got some resources there, such as links to places where you can really easily set up contracts and all the things you need to start as a web designer. And then when you go through to make that purchase, please ensure that you use the coupon code. There's a field for that on the final screen, and enter KICK 2016, KICK 2016, and you'll get that for 50% off. Okay, well, we've got some questions. So I'm now going to jump to those. This might just take me a minute or so to find. Okay. All right, we've got a lot, and I'll try my best to get through all of these. There is an opportunity at the end, though, that if you don't get your question answered, or if I don't go through it in as enough detail as you want, that you can join us at siteskills.com/forum and ask some questions there. Please do that. Okay. Someone's asked the question, will the webinar be available offline? I'm hoping so. I have hit the record button, and so if everything works there, I will send an email to the entire list, actually, with the opportunity to have a look at that. Now, Nicholas has asked, when would be a good time to send through 1 or 100 questions? If you've got 100 questions, today is probably not the day to answer all of them. But again, our forum might be a place for that. Please feel free if you've got some really pressing questions right now to ask. Happy to answer anything that I can. So I'm just reading this. This next question, I think, is kind of beyond the scope of what I'm trying to teach today. I might get back to you separately. All right, I touched on this point. John has asked, Richard, thanks. My question is how much of your work is face-to-face meeting with clients and how much is done through email and video chats? I live in a fairly rural part of the USA and the client potential is much better elsewhere. So I'd be interested in any tools you have used to bridge that gap with any of your clients. All right, so I did touch on the point that at that last slide where I said that you need to do some face-to-face, and if you have the opportunity to do that, then that's what you should be doing. That doesn't mean that you can't do stuff remotely. So the tool that I'm using at the moment is Zoom, and it's the webinar version of Zoom, but they also have just a meeting version. It's quite inexpensive, and I don't know what the experience has been at your end, of course, but for me so far I'm pretty happy with it. But I think they've even got a free version to just get you going. So definitely you can do that. It's got a whiteboard facility, which I haven't tried to use this time. You can share the screen, as you saw with my keynote presentation before. I think that's going to be your #1 tool. You could use Skype, of course, but this is a good one. Definitely harder, though, for you, because once you've got a client, you can use a tool like this, but how do you get the clients? It's harder if you are in a position like that. Can, in some cases, be easier too, in that rural people, in my experience here in Australia, rural and people in regional areas can actually be, I hope this doesn't sound too crass, but can be easier to sell to. They tend to be more accepting. Us city folk perhaps are a little bit more cynical, or maybe it's a competition thing. So if you can go out and do some face-to-face stuff, if there is I don't know how remote your area is, but if you've got some sort of local business group that you can go to, that's a great way to start. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to be harder. I need to digest that one a bit to think what I would do in that situation. I'd probably even be inclined to do a little bit of travel. This is a bit more of an advanced technique, but I'd be wanting to go to a busier area and put on an event where I could talk to some of the local people there and actually do a bit of training like I've just done with you now, and then answer questions, and that will lead to the odd client. Like I said, that's a bit of an advanced thing. Hopefully that helps. If I can think of something more that might make a really good blog post. Okay, Sharon's asked about copy of the recording. I've answered that. I'll try and get that linked out to you. Everything goes well. Okay, Nicholas has asked a whole bunch of things. Let me just scan this and see if I can go through maybe some of them. I'm not sure how to answer your first one. How to get clients to be actively involved, and when do you decide to remove yourself from the project? Well, if I understand your question, I'd be removing myself from the project, not when the project ends, but when the client's sick of me, if you know what I mean. I like to deal with people on an ongoing basis. And when choosing clients, if I were to start again tomorrow, I'd only be looking for people who didn't just want a website now, but need that ongoing recurring revenue. Hopefully that answers that. How to guarantee clients and continued work? Well, the continued work I would be talking about either right up front or maybe at the end. That kind of depends on you and the size of the project. It's a nice idea to be able to say to people up front, and we can help you down the track, because a lot of people like to hear that up front, like to know that you're not just going to disappear and that a website is not just a one-time deal. How to guarantee clients? Well, that's a trickier one. I don't think I ever said to someone, I guarantee you that if we build this website, you're going to get X result. It's actually a little dangerous. One of the things that I talk about in the Kickstart course is getting insurance. Now, there's a couple of types of insurance, and one of them is product indemnity. I think that's what a lot of countries call it. And it's a similar thing to what doctors have, so that it protects them from malpractice. Not everyone will take this up, but it's one that I do encourage you to at least consider. It can be expensive, because I know someone that actually made a promise to a client, wasn't able to fulfill that promise, and the client sued them, and they lost pretty much everything. So it is an insurance policy that you should consider, and I'll talk about it a bit more in the course, but you can look for it. It's product indemnity or something along those lines, and quite often it's bundled with what's it called, public liability, which is the insurance that protects you if you go into a client's premises and knock over their 5,000-year-old Ming Dynasty vase or something. So yeah, be a bit careful about guaranteeing. Instead, say something along the lines of, look, if you've already got a website, how many leads are you getting now? Do you think we should try this to increase the number of leads that you're getting? I'm not going to go through all of those questions, but I'll just pick up. Okay, so this is a good one. How much of this is applicable to all country areas? I think it's applicable anywhere, except bear in mind the comment that I just made about being in a remote area. Obviously, that is trickier. A lot of people like to get into web design and think, well, I can just do all of this work on Upwork or Freelancer. Forget it. That might be okay to get a bit of practice in and so forth, but it's a very demoralizing experience because you're competing against people in other countries that are happy to work for $2 an hour. So it applies to all countries' areas, except you'll obviously need to replace the figures that I gave for something that's more relevant in your country. But, Greece. Greece is probably one of the countries that's most suffering at the moment in terms of their economy. And yet there are still opportunities there. Businesses need websites wherever they are. And if you're in a recession situation, you need to market more. Businesses need to be doing more marketing if times are tough. And that's how I would sell it if you're in a country where you're in that sort of situation. When you're in a remote area, though, certainly that is more difficult. So I'd revert to the comment that I made earlier. Okay, so you've made the point when I said most don't make money. The reason I said that is because most approach it the wrong way, and I think I answered that throughout the rest of the presentation. It might be the right career choice for you, only you can decide that. What can I earn? I think I covered that. The reason, though, that most people don't make money long-term is perhaps where I should qualify that, is because they're approaching the wrong clients and they're not charging enough. And they're not taking the right attitude in that you're not there as an expense, but you're there as an investment to help that business. Okay. A lot of those questions are very subjective, and so it's hard for me to answer. So one of them is, if things aren't working for whatever reason, how long would you say is a reasonable time to look elsewhere? Only you can make that call. It depends on your finances. Clearly, if you keep doing this for 10 years and you're not making any money, then that should tell you something. Either you need to change something or it isn't right for you. I can't answer that question. Okay. All right. Stella asks, assume I get a job. There'll be a first meeting to get the feel. When is a point of no return when it's feasible to start charging the client? Okay. The process, which again, I touch in well, don't touch in, actually, a lot of Kickstart talks about the process. You need to charge the client at the point that a contract changes hands. Okay, you don't have the job until money changes hands. So the process very broadly is you go and have a meeting. You might do a little bit of planning up front, but then a point needs to come fairly quickly, really by about the second or third meeting, where you say, okay, well, this is my broad proposal. It might cost $2,000 or $3,000 to develop this, and the way we get started is to pay maybe a third. When you get a bit more experience, you might be able to get away with half up front, and then you do some paperwork. At that point, the client is committed to the project. Until money changes hands, you don't have a sale. All right, you've still got a prospect. They're not a client. Hopefully that answers that. That is the point of no return, is really when money changes hands. You're kind of asking, though, when does money change hands? You have a meeting, you need to convince the client that you're the person who can develop the website for them, and the conversation generally ends with you saying something like, okay, so let's get started with the paperwork. Wade asks, I currently run a network maintenance business successfully. Great. I did a bit of networking and I hated it. That's why I did web design, but it's a good thing you can add to what you do. I ran an ISP at one stage as well, don't ask. I do some web design using cheesy software, and I'm not real savvy with HTML, but suffice. What software platforms other than Joomla do you teach, or do you have a what? I'm not sure what you've written there. Convincing line to convince me that Joomla is awesome. I don't want to talk about Joomla today. I appreciate that almost everybody here today has come to me as a result of Build a Joomla website, and that's still a project that I'm working on and will be involved in. This, though, is a little different in that I'm talking specifically about the web design side of things. Joomla's great. I still like using it, and WordPress is not as great, and there's lots of other platforms out there. What you choose to use isn't so important. I mean, I'm almost starting to be convinced that Wix and Squarespace are adequate for certain jobs, whereas 5 years ago, there's no way I would have been convinced to say that. The tool you use is far less important than how you go about running the business. If you're not so savvy with HTML, that's okay. Use a web designer platform. I'm not great at CSS or PHP or JavaScript. I always got other people to help me with that side of things. What I was good at was being able to go into a business and looking at things and saying, yeah, you need this. And I knew enough about the behind the scenes stuff to be able to say to somebody else, all right, we need a site, we're going to choose this template, or we're going to do this design from scratch, and get somebody else to put it together. I think it's great if you do everything yourself to begin with, but as money comes in and as your business hopefully grows, then it's a great idea to start forming some relationships with people to be able to get them to do that side of things so that you can go and do other things like get more clients that they can't do. I hope that answers your question. Okay, Carolyn asks, does the Kickstart course cover how to price client projects? Yes, but it's more along the lines of what I've already discussed, and that is, it's not by the hour, it's not by the project. I'm encouraging you to charge based on what you feel the job is worth to the client. Admittedly, this takes some time and practice to get the feel for what a business makes. There's nothing wrong in actually asking people when you first meet with them, what's a new client worth to you? This is where I guess a bit of life experience is helpful. At 25, this was harder for me than it is now at 45. I can look at a business and get a bit of a feel and say, you know what, that physiotherapist is probably, I've got 4 kids, so I've had lots of expenses over the years, and so I've got a bit of a feel for what a service business generally might charge. So a physiotherapist, let's say they're charging $80. I know that a typical client might need to go back, let's say 3 or 4 times. So I know that a new client might be worth $300 to $400 to $500 to that client. I feel pretty confident that I could bring them in 5 new clients a month. And so, that might be worth an extra $2,000 a month to them. Therefore, in 6 months' time, the website that I built for them will have brought in about $12,000. Therefore, I could probably put a package together that's worth $6,000 that's going to be really good value for them. So we do talk about that a little bit in the Kickstart course. It's a bit more of an advanced technique because of the fact that you need a bit of business understanding. So, but I would go in on that basis, even from day one. Think about what it's worth to the client. Now, I'm not saying that at day one that you can charge $6,000, $10,000 for a site, but that's where you can be working towards as you get more and more experience. I hope that helps. Can you put up the website link to the course again? Someone asks. So if you go to learn.siteskills.com, that we've actually effectively got two sites at the moment. We've got the main site, but we're using somebody's learning management platform. And so all the courses are there, learn.siteskills.com, and you'll see the link to Kickstart your web design business. Okay, Kieran asks, can you give me a general idea of what percentage of time is used in each phase of the project from start to finish? Great question. It's different with every project, and it also depends on whether or not you're doing everything. Let's assume you are. I would actually be spending as much time as possible at the start, and that's because of that whole scope creep thing. So when I say as much time as possible, might take you this again is hard the very first step is really hard to answer, because the first step is prospecting, just getting out there and talking to people, and that can take a lot of time. But let's assume that from the time that you get the job, so you might spend 10% of the project time convincing someone to give you the job. I would spend 50% in planning, minimum 50%, and that means that we're only left with 40%. So I've spent 10% up front, 50% of the time on the planning stage, and that means changing a lot of thinking for web developers. A lot of web developers are just desperate to get the job and then go, right, let's build the thing. No, spend lots of time with the client. More meetings at the beginning is great, and that will cut down on your scope creep. And then maybe, if you had everything in front of you now, if you had the perfect website plan in front of you right now, how long would it take you to build the website? It's actually not that much time. Once you know exactly what to do, building the site doesn't take that much time. Probably the most frustrating part of building the site is when things go wrong. A plugin is broken, or it's just not doing what you need to do, and you can outsource a little bit of that work. So I'd say, what do I say I've got left? I'd say 30% building it, and then 10% sort of testing and a bit of training with the client, something like that. Spend lots and lots of time up front. That's what I would do very differently if I was doing this today. Okay, David asks, do you recommend the client sign a binding contract before the website is built? You put binding in inverted commas, and so I'm not sure why you've done that. You need some sort of agreement for sure. Now, contracts are a pain in the neck. There is a lesson on contracts in the course, and the bottom line is this. And there's also a resource to a link to, I don't mind giving it to you now. If you Google something like web design contract in plain English, you'll probably find the one that I've put in the course, and it's a really good one because it's written in plain English. A contract is only worth the paper it's written on. What that expression means is that there's no point having a contract unless you're prepared to follow through on it. And quite frankly, with a web design project, you're probably not, because if something goes wrong, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there and sue the person and get a lawyer for something that might only be worth $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000 to you? You need a contract really to protect you. If you don't get paid, sure, you can chase the client. There's things that you can do, but at the end of the day, there's probably going to be times where you're going to get ripped off. I much prefer to use the word agreement so that the client knows exactly where you stand. I could do a whole separate webinar. In fact, I wouldn't mind doing this on just client relationships. And the number one thing I guess I'd be saying is the reason that things go wrong is that when communication stops. And I was guilty of this for sure. When you might stop talking to a client because you're sick of them, things are going bad, but you can't afford to do that. That's where disagreements come in. So yeah, you need something on paper, you need the client's signature on paper, but if you give them a big 20-page software document, you'll lose the job, and that's happened to me. I was in a situation where I knew that I needed a better contract, and I came up with one, and it was a nightmare, and I just didn't want to sign it because it had all this jargon in it, but that plain English one is fantastic. Giovanni, hello. Nice to have you on here. Now, in the US, the insurance is called E&O. Okay, errors and emissions. I used to write E&O on the. I used to write E&O accepted, errors and emissions accepted, or something. I didn't know that there was actually an insurance policy called that. So thank you. That's not really a question. So in the US, Giovanni's claiming that you should be looking for a thing called E&O, error and omission. Fran, hello to you. I'm developing websites for a non-profit organisation for free, and it had headaches. Oh yeah, was trying to get them to provide the content they would like and also to own the website. Any suggestions on how to best import them or whatever? Again, in the course, and I'm saying this so that you know, not so much to sell you on it. Obviously, I want you to buy it, but you're here to learn. I do talk a little bit about trying to steer away from non-profits. I worked for a number of non-profits, so they do fall into groups. There's the little independent non-profit, and it sounds like you might be dealing with one of those. But there are some massive non-profits I dealt with, and I kind of want to name them, but I better not. But an international, very large non-profit, they were still a nightmare to work for, because they did tend to attract, how can I put this delicately? I can't. Look, they had great people working for them at some level, but at the level that I was involved in, they were not so great. There we go. That's the most diplomatic way of putting it. And that is often the case with non-profits. So I actually say in the course to steer clear if you can. That doesn't help to answer your question though. And so I'm not quite sure what to tell you. If you're doing it for free is part of the problem, because they don't respect you. And it has headaches with trying to get them to provide the content they would like, and also to own the website. I guess my best advice to you there is to try and push it back on them. You need to do some planning before you start building the site, and to get them to own it is hard. And this is again why I tried to avoid them. I mean, I enjoyed working with a couple of them. I did a lot of church sites, for example, and they were hard because of the exact things that you're bringing up, particularly when you're doing it for free. They don't treat it seriously. And it's sad for me to say that, but it's true. I guess I would put it back on them a bit. I'd go and have a planning meeting and try and nut out exactly what needs to go, how many pages you need, which pages you need, what's going to go on each page, who's going to develop the content, and then put their initials next to it and a deadline. That's what I do with website planning. We come up with a plan, we do a bit of a wireframe. You should be familiar with that term, hopefully. If not, that's something I can talk about in the forum. And on that wireframe, you put the initials of each person and a date, and you challenge them on it, and you say, what would stop you from producing that content now? And if they say something like, well, we don't have the photos, great, who's going to provide the photos? That type of thing. Giovanni again asks, do you see clients looking for just a basic 3-page site plus asking you to help them flush out their Google business listing and map? If so, what's a fair price? Well, the fair pricing again comes down to what's that worth to that particular business. Now, I would encourage you to steer clear of those sorts of packages because it's going to be a struggle for you to make enough money. At first, though, great, jump onto it. Now, if again a physio came to me and said, we just want a really basic site, I'd be trying to sell them up. I'd be saying, but you know, if you do this, this, and this, you can get X, Y, Z return. So I'm not going to give you a fair price to charge. I'm sorry. That really does come down to the business. What's a fair price also to you might not necessarily be a fair price to them. If you can start adopting the mindset of thinking about what's it worth to them, that's when you can charge accordingly. I know people will do $500 for a solution like that, but really, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You've got to be, a 3-page site. I know this sounds like a lot. $2,000. You've got to be getting a couple of $1,000s for it to be worth your while to do a good job. Maybe you can sell it on the basis of your website. You might be not replacing this thing for 3 years, and so over 3 years, that's only going to be a $700 a year investment effectively for you. Hopefully, that'll get you closer to that point. Carolyn asks, when you do have plenty of work, how do you deal with needing more help to getting the work done, employees or subcontractors? Pros and cons to both approaches. Having an employee, I've done both. Having an employee is great to a point. Okay, so the cons are you've got to pay them whether they're there or not if they get sick, then holiday pay and all those other things that I mentioned before. That's a pain in the neck. The big pro is that you've got control over their hours. Now you can say to them, well, today we're working on this, this, and this, go. They're, however, not nearly as joined to the business as you are. And so I think if I were to start again, I would be considering doing something like a profit share arrangement. You need these days to have employees who've got a bit of skin in the game. That expression means that they're actually connected with your business, that your success actually leads to their success as well. That's not easy to do. It's certainly not easy to do at the start, but I would consider that. And again, that's probably a conversation that's beyond the scope of today. So I like the idea of employees. I like the idea of local employees, but it's expensive. And so that's hard to do. Therefore, most web designers work with subcontractors, at least at the beginning. The downside of subcontractors, though, is the opposite. It's the fact that you're not in control of their hours, and therefore you're kind of at their behest in that they will only work when it suits them. So you might give them a job. And this particularly is a problem when it comes to revisions, and why you need to get your planning really, really solid at the start. So the worst thing is that you go back to them and say, oh, well, I've got these revisions, and then another round of revisions, and then another round of revisions, which can take weeks and then upset your client and upset your workflow as well. But if you've got the planning really solid up front, which is why I encouraged someone earlier to spend a lot of time at the beginning, then you can get around that to a certain extent. Realistically, for a lot of people, subcontractors is the way to go. If you've got someone in your local city, that's a big bonus. Okay, Giovanni again. Do you also offer additional services such as taking photographs, creating the video, hosting, etc.? What else do you offer? Right now, I don't offer anything. I'm not doing any web design anymore. If I were to start again today, I would be seriously looking at video, at least having that as a service. That is a specialist skill, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be Hollywood. Right now, I've got 2 very inexpensive lights pointing at me. I bought 5 lights for, I don't know, $150 or something, and in the US, it'll be even cheaper. I got a fancy DSLR camera that's sitting over my shoulder there. I'm not actually sure if you can see me at the moment, but if you can, over my shoulder, you can see a nice Canon camera that I got to do all my video. And I'm not using it now, I'm using the headset, of course, but I've got a lavalier microphone, one of those lapel mics, and then you can do some basic video that can really improve a business's website dramatically. It can also work against you if you do a lousy job, but to get a specialist video company in to do stuff is expensive. If you can do some low-end video, particularly for I'd probably be concentrating on e-commerce businesses. If you can go to a business and say, hey, I can create little 30, 60-second videos for each of your products, that's worth a lot of money to a business, because the increase, I do a bit of e-commerce, and the increase that you see when you've got video demonstrating a product is huge. Hosting, I in the end decided to steer away from it. Hosting's a pain in the neck. You don't make much money out of it. Because you can get hosting now for $3 a month or something. It's really not worth your while, because you're the one who's going to get the phone call at 2 a.m. in the morning when the website's down. And so I understand it's great customer service to set up the hosting, but I would be inclined to palm that off onto the client. I'm also a little concerned about a conversation I had with another developer who was telling me that it's now kind of dangerous to offer hosting, because you can be personally liable for any downtime. I'd steer away from that. What else do you offer? I mentioned some of them, such as email marketing is a big one, and I don't want to say too much yet, but in the back of my mind is something along those lines in terms of a course. I think that starting an email marketing business is equally as exciting as web design. That's something where you can get a lot of recurring revenue, and you can provide a really valuable service to a business. And that's something that on its own you could probably charge $500 a month for. I know people who are doing that here. I know people who are doing a full service for $1,000 a month. They're quite a high-end agency. Even at $250 a month to put together 1 or 2 emails for a client every month is pretty good money. Okay, we've still got 10 or so questions. The way that we're traveling, I'll do my best to get through all of those. Sam's asked a similar question. How do you approach selling the value of ongoing service? So the value is the same as selling the original value of the website. So it depends, again, what service you're providing. Let's say that you love Facebook, Twitter, and all of that, which I tend not to. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a great service. I think if you're into that, you should provide it. It's just not me. So that's a very valuable service for a business. In fact, I really need to be outsourcing that side of things for our business because it can bring in lots of traffic, lots of new people, and it's the sort of thing that sucks up a lot of time for businesses. So if you were to offer that service, that's the value. Once you've got a bit of experience with it is when you can start quoting some actual figures. I don't, and so it's a bit hard for me to use that one. But with email marketing, again, there's a stat out there that says that for every $1 that you put into email marketing, the return on investment is $38. That's incredible. And yes, I remember where I've just recently, there's another course that we're working on, which will be a free course that you can get soon from us, that talks a bit about email marketing. And so there's the value. It means every $100 you put down, you're going to get $3,800 back. That's how you sell a value. So it'll come down to what you're selling, and that's going to come with a bit of experience. Okay, Carolyn asks, yeah, okay, so the difference between a startup business and established business. I agree, yes, it does seem that doing websites for startup businesses is not as lucrative as established businesses. Excuse me. So if people are coming to you with a startup business and they've got limited startup funds, and they're the wrong clients, I think they're great to begin with and to get some experience, fantastic, but it'll be frustrating because they don't know what they're doing yet. They don't know what they need, and so there's a real danger that they'll be changing their mind often. Yes, I would be approaching established businesses. Mark said you missed the start. Yes, I mentioned at the start that I'm trying to record this, and if everything goes well, I'll send a link to everyone where you can see the replay. Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, here's a good one. So Kieran asks, assuming being disciplined based on a 20-hour part-time work week, and that's a great thing to aim for, about 20 hours, if you can start part-time, what would a normal day involve? Well, there is no normal day, because some days you'll be prospecting and some days you won't. But a day in the life of a web developer is a blog post that I might write one day. To give you a short version now, it kind of depends on you a little bit. So I'm a lark. I work best in the morning, and you need to learn at what time of the day works best for you. I talk a little bit about this in another course that we've got called Time Management for Web Designers. I haven't promoted that one yet, but it is up on the side if that's of interest. It doesn't really answer your question though, so let me do that now. Based on a 20-hour week, first thing is you learn when you're most efficient, whether that's the morning, middle, or the end of the day. Some people work well in the evening. I think you're all very strange. I can't do that. I don't work well at night at all. Which is why a number of people are upset with me at the moment that I'm not running this webinar much later. This is my prime time, is between, I quite often will work between about 6 and 12:30, and then I fade through the rest of the day. So that's the first thing. You need to do your productive work, which is working on the website when you're freshest. So keep that in mind. But based on a 20-hour week, I'd be spending, at first you need to spend 50-50, 50% of your time marketing and 50% of your time building the site. Right, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, once you've got your marketing right, then you don't need to do that so much, but certainly at first, about half of your time might be that. So when's that 50-50? I'll be doing a bit each day, whether that involves going to a business group, perhaps for a breakfast to start making some relationships there, or it might be door knocking some businesses and saying, hi, I'm starting a web design business, and I'd like to just ask you a few questions about your business. You're not selling them anything. Sorry, this is getting a bit off topic. But that's something you might be able to do for an hour or two a day, just going and making connections with people. That knocking on the door idea is a good one. Very few people will do this, but I quite like the idea. I, at one stage, did something very different. I was producing a little local publication, which wouldn't work these days. It still exists, actually. I don't want to get too distracted, but I'll give you the brief of it. It did involve me going to cafes and giving them a little newsletter that I was putting together each week, and they would display it. And I learned a lot about businesses just by doing that. And they said, oh, what else do you do? I said, oh, well, I'm a web designer. And we'd just get into conversations. And occasionally people would come to me and say, well, I need an e-commerce site built. So I think a really great way to start is to grab a clipboard, some paper, go and knock on some doors, and don't try and sell anything. Just go and talk to people, have some conversations, say, hi, I'm looking at starting a web design business. I'm trying to get a bit of an idea what other local businesses think of their current website. Can I just spend a few minutes with you asking you some questions? And just get into conversations. I guarantee if you do that enough, you'll get some people that go, you know what, we had a website built by someone and we've never heard from them since, and it's terrible and it doesn't work and the inquiry form's not working and I don't know what to do about it. Can you help me? So by going from a very non-threatening situation, you can get work. Might take some time. It's not the same as cold calling, which you would do on the phone, which is something I really hate. It's actually getting out there face-to-face. And that's the bit about getting uncomfortable. So hard question to answer, but hopefully that's given you a couple of tips. There is no such thing as a normal day. You know, it might be get up, go out and talk to some people, maybe go to a business group meeting, work on those relationships, come back, build websites for 4 hours if you've got that time in that day, answer some emails at your most unproductive time. That's the biggest tip that I give in that time management course. And that's your day. Nicholas asks, at what point do you stop being someone who just makes websites and start being a web designer? This is a great question. How would you suggest someone increases their confidence in their abilities? Also, an average time frame to give a first proof. Okay, so it's kind of 2 questions there. I'll look at that one secondly. So there is a distinction between somebody who just makes websites and somebody who's a web designer. And I think that distinction is when you stop thinking of yourself as a web designer and instead see yourself as a problem solver. And so again, I touched on this in the presentation. You need to start learning about what works for businesses so that you can go into a business with confidence and say, yeah, right, okay, so what we can do to increase your leads or get more sales or get more inquiries so you're not having to send brochures out or whatever is this. And that is going to take some more training, really beyond what's in Kickstart, and experience. And that's the point that I really think that you're a web designer. In fact, I wouldn't even use that term then. I'd say that you're a business consultant. I heard a different term the other day, which I won't be able to remember now. I don't know, it was like process analyst or something fancy. But that's when you can start to make the big bucks. Now, you've also asked an average time frame to give a first proof, second proof, etc. All jobs are different, but generally, yeah, all jobs are different. Well, I'm going to sort of answer this by going back to you and saying, make sure that instead of a first proof of a design, that you're actually coming up with a really good plan first, or doing a low resolution version of the design so that you don't run in, or you're less likely to run into that scope creep situation. But that's not what you've asked. Once you've done all of your needs analysis, you know what's needed for the website, you should be able to come up with a really good rough, if you're doing this full time, within a week. A second proof, once they've agreed to all of that, within another week, and so forth. But some of that's also going to depend on content. And this is something that I'm a little surprised no one's asked yet, because one of the challenges with being a web designer is getting the content out of people. And the question that I've got in previous webinars on similar topics is, who's responsible for developing the content? Is that you as the web designer, or is that the client? And I guess the answer is it's a bit of both, because you don't know the client's business, so you can't be expected to go in and write everything. Also, copywriting is a specialist skill and not something that you would necessarily have. So I'm really off losing my train of thought. Average time frame, yeah. So that's going to depend a bit on how much content is required. If they've already got an existing website, it's obviously a lot easier, because you might be able to repurpose the content that they've got on their current site and put it into the new site. So again, it's difficult to give you definite answers, but if I want to see you get through a site in a month, from start to stop in a month. Hard, but doable. And you need some practice, which again is why it's not the sort of thing you can step into tomorrow and start making $5,000 a month, but certainly over time with practice and experience you can. Okay, Caroline asked, or really it's not a question, bidsketch.com. Yeah, I've heard of that one. I'm sure I've seen it. It's a great way to put together a contract that will not scare away your clients, but has enough teeth to protect you. It also looks really professional. If I remember this site, it's quite clever. I can't remember why, whether it's got a series of Q&As or what the thing was, but yeah, thanks for that. That's a nice resource, bidsketch.com. Stella said that I said, don't start with creating the actual site. I've done a few for free jobs with non-web savvy people, and I most often hastily whip up a dummy site as a starting point for discussions and planning. Do you have any specific reasons not to do that? If I said that, then you've misinterpreted it, or I haven't said it well. But generally, the process that I go through is a brainstorm. we might do a bit of research first, have a look at what their competitors are doing, then a brainstorm as to what's going to be on the site. And I really don't think that you can do any sort of design work until you've gone through at least that stage. So maybe that's what I meant by that. So I've got a love-hate relationship with templates, for example. Templates can be good, and they can be a really good point to start discussion. So if you're starting off and you're doing some lower end work, and we all start with the $500 websites, usually, I'm just really encouraging you to not stay at that point, then a template's probably the way to go. And you can say, yeah, well, look, here's a typical sort of template. I don't like using the word template, by the way. Here's a typical looking website, and we could do something like this. Maybe the color's got to be a little bit different, and you could have picture here and that information there. Sure, there's nothing wrong in doing that. But I think that before that point, the reason I say I've got a love-hate relationship with templates is that the downside of that is that you're suddenly creating a site based on the template rather than what might be the need of the site, if that makes sense. You're welcome. Mark, I'm trying to keep the conversation away from Joomla a little bit, but as you've asked, you've asked what's my favorite e-commerce extension in Joomla. Sorry, I don't have one. There is in the Joomla training at the moment no, I took it out actually. That's right. We took out the e-commerce training because it really got out of date, and the extension that I was using at the time has disappeared, I think. There's a number, and that's, I think, something that we should talk about in the Build a Joomla website forum, but in brief, probably the best one I've seen is Red Shop, R-E-D shop. But to give you a longer answer, if I was to do some e-commerce today, I wouldn't be using Joomla. And I'm sorry to my Joomla friends who have made e-commerce extensions. I've currently got a couple of sites running WooCommerce and WordPress. I'm not particularly excited by that solution either. And in the new year, I'm probably going to move our shops to Shopify. There's all sorts of reasons for that I really can't get into. Like I say, feel free to ask that same question in the Build a Joomla website forum, and I can give you a more detailed answer. You're welcome. Okay. Carolyn has said, try using, yeah, I've looked at this one. I don't even know how you pronounce it, ECWID. For e-carts, and that is cross-platform. I've looked at it and I don't know, I think I wasn't excited, but hey, there's a recommendation for people that might be helpful. The last one I'm going to take here, because it's our last question, is from Fran. If you don't use a template, how do you proceed? All right, so this is more of a web designer question rather than a web design business question, just to clarify, and I'm happy to answer it. I have, over in the Joomla side, been talking about templates a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way that you go. Now, all Joomla sites use a template. So when I use the word template, I use it incorrectly. What I really should be saying is a pre-made web design template, as opposed to a template that you create from scratch. So of course, with Joomla and WordPress and other systems, you can do that. You can create your own design. Most designers use a tool such as WordPress, and then you can code that accordingly and put it into Joomla. That's how you proceed. So if you have design skills only, then you can design something in Photoshop and go and find somebody who's familiar with how to code a Joomla template and do it that way. It tends to be more expensive, that's all. And as we tend to deal with a lot of beginners, I like to talk about pre-made templates. But really the power of Joomla and other platforms is that you can create your own designs and make them more fancy. And in fact, do very clever things with Joomla templates that Joomla, I think, as a community, doesn't sell well enough. We should be telling designers things such as you can have overrides for certain pages, and the template structure in Joomla is actually really, really powerful. But yeah, not something that I'm going to talk about today. So you can come up with a unique design though and have that done. Hey, that brings us to the end of the questions. Thanks very much for joining me today. Once again, if you want that link to Site Skills, it's siteskills.com /forum. And if you wanted to take that next step and get the Kickstart course, can I encourage you to do that today, as that offer does end at the end of the day. I've got one last one from Wade, and really, it's not a question. Okay, thank you for your comment. So I will wrap it up there. I'm hoping to do this a bit more, so look out for another webinar coming out down the track. If you have any questions or would you like to take this discussion further, please consider joining us at siteskills.com/forum. Check us out at the blog, siteskills.com/blog. And I don't think there's anything else that I can add. So thanks again for joining me today.